Man, with how quick I'm putting these videos out right now, I feel like Kendrick with how much I'm dropping. I mean, to be fair, it kind of helps that, again, I just happen to have a quiet house right now, so that helps in terms of making me want to film because I won't have to worry about much outside noise. Also, to be fair, I am just starting my new job, so I don't know if I'll be able to put out these videos as frequently as I'm doing now, but I will certainly try my best. But either way, welcome back to I Want to Talk About, the series where I take a topic, I sit on camera, and I blabber about it. And you know the drill. The series within a series continues. You could see it in the title. Today, I want to talk about my favorite video games of 2003. Now, if you don't know how the series works, it starts off with me talking about the given year in video gaming, what the climate looked like, how the consoles were doing, all that good stuff. And then I talk about the games in a few specific segments. First, I go over some big games that I didn't play in the given year, some games that just missed the cut of my two proper lists, games that would be about a 7 out of 10 on my scale, the cream before the crop, the games that I would give an 8 or 9 out of 10 to, and then my proper best list of 10 out of 10 games. Again, there have been enough videos in the series that you probably know how it works, but I can't assume this is your second video in the series or anything like that. Many of you are probably just watching this and it's your first time, so welcome. Glad to have you here. Let's talk about some games. So, 2003, a year of gaming that, in my research, felt like it was honestly pretty slow. 2001 and 2 were really fun and exciting years and there were a lot of great games to talk about, but 2003 feels a lot lighter. And I mentioned at the end of last video that there would be a surprise or two along the way, and there are going to be, but one of those surprises is that 2003 is one of only 2 years that I'll be talking about in this series where I won't have a proper best list. I mean, sure, if I talked about the 80s and 90s individually, we'd have a different conversation about that, but this will be one of only 2 videos where there won't be a proper best list because, oddly enough, there was no game in 2003 that got a 10 out of 10 for me. That seems weird, I know, especially because I tend to give a few more 10 out of 10s than most do, but I guess it just happens that way. As far as sales, I mean, the PS2 was still selling the best of the bunch. The sales were down a touch, of course, but it was still doing incredibly well. And the GameCube and Xbox weren't really showing much meaningful growth either. Both of them kind of took a small dip in sales. The only system at the time that had really shown much growth as far as sales was the Game Boy Advance, and that's largely helped by the fact that the Game Boy Advance SP was released in 2003. Finally, a version of the Game Boy Advance where you could actually see what's going on the screen. And it flipped open and closed. That's fun. Between that and 2003 being the year where Sony announced and showed off the first prototype of its first portable platform, which you probably already know what it is, but we'll get into it in a later video. 2003 almost felt like the year of the handheld. I don't know if it's that all the consoles were struggling in different ways or what, but it felt like it was a fun time to be part of the handheld market. I mean, again, if you were GameCube, you were struggling to fly off shelves, and Nintendo couldn't find ways to push you off shelves, even though they had a new Mario Kart game that year. And if you were Xbox, well, what's that thing they always say about Xbox? Wait until next year? Oddly, I say that jokingly, but 2003 was kind of feeling like a transitional year for the industry, weirdly enough. Even though the 6th generation had just started, we were already kind of getting hints into the next generation. By the end of 2003, Nintendo was already announcing that another game product would launch in 2004. Follow along with that handheld thing I was mentioning earlier, and you probably already know where this is going. And in my research, I was finding that they were already announcing in 2003 that the next Nintendo console would be backwards compatible with GameCube games. The GameCube was only 2 years old, and already we were talking about its successor at the time. And Nintendo wasn't the only one that could say that, because in 2003, Microsoft was already announcing that ATI would be developing the GPU for their next platform, which at the time was codenamed Project Xenon. Again, much like the GameCube, the Xbox was only 2 years old, but we were already talking about its successor. So even though we had just gotten into the 6th generation, 2003 was kind of just feeling like a transitional year. And I don't know if that had a huge impact on the number of games or the quality of games, but it just so happened that after 2 incredibly strong years, 2003, at least for me, didn't really quite keep up. And thus, as far as an intro, there's not really much to talk about here. I mean, I doubt y'all care enough to hear me talk about the N-Gage. What? What do you mean you care? I mean, thank you, I appreciate it. I'm glad you hear about hearing me talk, but about the N-Gage? I don't know shit about this thing. Look at it, it's hideous. How would you even begin to play a video game on this thing? And apparently it's also a phone? Quite frankly, if I was walking around with a phone like that, I'd feel like a douchebag. And my phone's already fucking gigantic, but I'd have to walk around with this thing that everyone thinks looks like a taco, but I don't really see a taco. taco in it. I kind of see like a slice of bread or something like that, but I don't see a taco. Either way, yeah, that's how you know 2003 was pretty unexciting, that I had to dedicate a portion of this video to the N-Gage. I'm sorry to anyone out there that actually is an N-Gage fan, or actually owned one back in the day. If you did, let me know in the comments. Did you own an N-Gage back in the day? I know I'm getting to the question part of the video a little early, but let me know if you actually owned an N-Gage, because I have never seen one of these things in the wild. Obviously, why would I? It wasn't geared at kids. You needed a phone plan to even make the thing work back in the day, and I was 5. You think I, as a 5-year-old, had a phone plan back in the day? Anyway, let's get out of the intro already. Let's not spend too much time talking about the N-Gage or wasting much time. Let's talk about games, because that's what we're here for, games. Now again, this is where I usually talk about the games that are huge snubs, like some of the big, highly acclaimed games that I didn't play in a given year, but there wasn't a lot in 2003 that I noticed that I didn't really play. I mean, the biggest one that I could find was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which I know was wildly influential and impactful when it came out, but combining the fact that I was 5 when it came out, I'm picky with RPGs, and I'm not the biggest Star Wars guy, yeah, this wasn't going to be my cup of tea. I mean, sure, this watch that I wear is actually a Star Wars watch, you can't tell, but it is a Star Wars watch, so I'm kind of a poser, but still, this game wasn't my thing, though don't worry, we'll talk about Star Wars later in the series. Other than that, I mean, I found a couple here. I mean, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, which I don't really have any experience with. I've only played one Prince of Persia game, the one that came out this year. That was pretty awesome. Go check that out. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is the name. I totally forgot for a second. 2003 was the year of Mario Kart Double Dash, but this is a game I didn't play a ton of, and for whatever reason, it's really hard to get into. There's also Beyond Good and Evil, which I tried, but just wasn't really my cup of tea, unfortunately. And apparently I'm seeing that 2003 was the year that the first Call of Duty game came out. That feels like it's worth mentioning because this franchise is one of the highest selling in gaming, and this is where it started. But I didn't start playing Call of Duty till much later in the series. Not that I'm a huge fan of the franchise, but I didn't start until about Call of Duty 3, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the latter of which we will definitely talk about, do not worry. But yeah, I really had to dig for some. A lot of those games that I mentioned weren't even in the script initially. But now we can talk about the games I did play, starting with the games that I consider the just missed the cut games. Games that I personally would consider a 7 out of 10 that wouldn't really make it on my list. There are 3 games listed here that just missed the cut. The first of them might be a little bit unpopular because I actually kind of liked it more than most did, and that's Devil May Cry 2. This is the one in the franchise that everyone hates, and I see why, but I still kind of enjoy it in spite of its flaws. It's definitely the least essential in the series, and I think the stand in place and shoot gameplay will throw a lot of people off, but I still kind of like it in spite of itself. There's also WarioWare Inc. Mega Micro Games, which was the first game in a franchise that I very much adore. I think this laid a good foundation for the rest of the franchise, but it also left a lot of room for improvement. The later games would prove to be a lot more clever and interesting, and would take better advantage of their consoles than this one would with the Game Boy Advance. Oh, and a license game! Don't worry, we have some in this video. One licensed game I enjoyed that just missed the cut was the Hulk video game of 2003. I never actually saw this Hulk movie, but I played this a lot in my youth and only just finally got around to beating it last year. It's not the greatest superhero game ever made, but it's definitely fun and it's really gratifying to just smash everything as the Hulk. Though I will say, I know some people are very adamantly against cheat codes, but I actually kind of recommend using the cheat codes in this game because they make those awful Bruce Banner stealth sections just a tiny bit easier to deal with. Just a tiny bit. But now we'll get on to the games I really loved. And like I said, there's no proper best list in this video because 2003 is a year that didn't have a 10 out of 10 game to me. So I guess this entire video is going to be the cream before the crop. I guess this is one of those times where you can call it the cream of the crop. With that said, I will crown one of these games as my proper game of the year, just so you know what my favorite one would be. And we've got 6 games here, so let's not waste any more time, let's just jump into them. It sounds a bit strange to say, but as much as Rayman 2 The Great Escape has become the sacred cow of the franchise and is an incredibly beloved 3D platformer, I actually think I like Rayman 3 Hoodlum Havoc a little bit more. Now I'll stress it's only a little bit more, but I'll still stand on it. I actually like this game better than Rayman 2. Obviously the great platforming of Rayman is still here in Rayman 3, but I think the combat is a lot smoother and more fun than it was in Rayman 2. And compared to that game, I actually kind of prefer this one going in a more linear direction. At times, Rayman 2's levels got a touch overwhelming for me, so having something more linear was just much better for me personally. It improved on several of my issues from Rayman 2 without introducing any major new ones, which is a great thing for a sequel to do. It's still shocking to me that beyond the fact that Ubisoft tends to forget Rayman exists in general, it's wild that they haven't really tried another mainline 3D Rayman game since this one, unless you count the early version of the first Rayman Raving Rabbids game that was going to be much closer to a platformer than the party game it ended up being. But this is still quite an enjoyable game, and I highly recommend it. I especially recommend trying the Rayman 3 HD re-release, which I think polishes the game up to an even greater degree. Some of you might be surprised to find out that this isn't my 2003 Game of the Year, but trust me, it was a pretty close one. This certainly made a good case for itself. The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker is a game I didn't really get to experience much in my youth, but I learned a lot about it through my high school years, at a time when I was really getting interested in canceled games, game betas, and unused content in gaming, all topics that maybe I will make videos about in the future. I was constantly hearing about that The Legend of Zelda 128 GameCube tech demo that everyone got hyped about, only to feel blueballed when the next Zelda game was revealed to be a lot more cartoony in its art style. But I mean, I like the cartoony art style. But while there was a lot of hate at first and people calling the game Zelda, it would end up getting a lot of retroactive love from those who did choose to play it, and my mantra of gameplay is infinitely more important than graphics lives to fight another day. But yeah, of course, Wind Waker is a great game. That change in visuals, for example, is honestly spectacular, and I love how stylized and colorful and expressive everything in the game is. That classic Zelda gameplay, combat, and puzzle design is also very heavily refined to an excellent degree here, and I didn't mind that this was made a touch easier than some of the past Zelda games. I think for me, it made Wind Waker an excellent title that I could easily recommend as like a first step into the world of Zelda. Like if someone was a new Zelda fan and had asked me, what's the first Zelda game I should try out? Wind Waker would probably be the first one I'd recommend. It probably would have gotten a 10 out of 10 for me if some of the sailing wasn't so monotonous at points, but otherwise, Wind Waker is a phenomenal game that, like the rest of the Zelda series, is absolutely worth your time. I also recommend grabbing the Wind Waker HD re-release on the Wii U, because adding the Swift Sail to make sailing a little bit faster and giving players a map is a huge plus. Definitely give it a look if you want to dive into Wind Waker for the first time. What you know about Toontown? Don't act like this game didn't carry the childhoods of many of us in the 2000s, because you know that it did. But yes, Toontown is a game I have had many, many fond memories with, even as someone who doesn't really play MMO games at all. This was pretty much my first step into the world of MMOs as a kid, and still pretty much my only step into the world of MMOs. And I think it's still an incredible game. It's easy to get into no matter your age or experience with this genre. I think the Disney references are plenty adorable. The trolley minigames are a lot of fun. Fishing! Come on, the fishing is awesome. And I honestly love the lore of this game. A bunch of toons in a world of corporate robot bosses that want to take away fun and can only be stopped with the power of gags. Hey, maybe that's how we overthrow the capitalist regime. If we want to stop capitalism, just go to the offices of the dirty CEOs and throw pies in their faces. Disclaimer, I'm not encouraging anyone to actually do that, and I will not be held liable if you do. Though it would be pretty funny. But yeah, this game was awesome back in the day, and I was really sad when Disney shut it down in 2013. Though it's cool to see fans have kept it around. There's a version of it now called Toontown Rewritten that basically keeps the original version alive while removing the Disney references for obvious reasons. I'll probably talk about it a bit deeper in a later video because I have played this version and I have it on my computer, but I highly recommend checking it out for yourself. Finally, I get to talk about Sonic in his 3D era, and again, it'll be the last time for a minute because Sonic's 3D era has been very up and down. A lot more down than up. Hell, I didn't talk about Sonic Adventure 2 because I have a hot take on that game and I don't love it as much as many others do, so I'll just refrain from giving my opinion on it. I will, however, give my opinion on Sonic Adventure, which is definitely one of my favorites in the series. Matter of fact, this was actually my first Sonic game. I got it as a Christmas present alongside my GameCube back in the day, and to this day, it's still a game I love going back to. Sure, it's got its warts and there are a few playable characters who are obviously less interesting to play as than others. Hot take, I'll take Big Story over Amy's story. I'm not kidding. Also, I know I love to make fun of bad old voice acting in video games in these videos, but I think I'll refrain this time because there are just too many cringy moments to pick from. The only thing I'll tell you guys right now is, that's Eggman! I wonder what happened to Sonic! Okay, I promise that's all I'm gonna say, but watch out! You're gonna crash! Ah! Okay, I promise that's all. I promise, I mean it. That's it. But despite all those warts, Sonic Adventure features some of Sonic's best levels in the 3D era. The core Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles gameplay is still incredibly fun to this day, and the soundtrack, I mean, it's Sonic. Of course the soundtrack's amazing. I mean, it's sad that some of the games aren't as good because I could talk for hours about Sonic soundtracks. Those shits are bumping. I can also only imagine how crazy it was to see this in Sonic Adventure 2 on the GameCube back in the day, given that Sonic was originally a rival to Nintendo, being on Sega platforms back in the day. I only didn't realize that when I first got this game because, like I said, I was like 5 or 6 when I first got it as a Christmas present, and my first thought at the time was, what the heck's a Sonic? But Sonic Adventure 1 is still one of my favorite 3D Sonic games, and definitely a game I love going back to, even if it's just as good to riff on as it is to play. The first Ratchet & Clank was a great introduction to the series, but as I mentioned in my last video, there are some elements of it that feel a bit dated. Of course, that's what the passage of time will do to video games. With Going Commando, Insomniac did an excellent job of polishing things up and tweaking it to be even better than the first one. I said this in my 1995 to 99 video, but since this continued into the 6th generation, it always blows my mind how much developers were able to improve on previous installments and franchises and continue to iterate as much as they did, despite having to release these sequels just a year later. It couldn't have been easy to develop that quick, but Insomniac was one of the best in the business at handling it. The combat is easier to get a handle on than the first game, and while it can definitely be much more challenging, especially when the game just throws massive waves of enemies at you, I hate when video games do that, I think the game leaves you well equipped enough to handle it. Combine that with some breathtaking worlds and excellent level design, and you've got another winner for Insomniac. I've said it many times before, but Insomniac is one of my favorite developers in the business, and they've proven why time and time again. And wouldn't you know it, it would only get better after this game. But again, despite 2003 being a year without a proper 10 out of 10 game, there was still one game I liked better than the others. And it's gonna be a wild one. I am going with a licensed game here. I'm just preempting you guys before you guys say, how the hell is that your game of the year? I really felt while going through this list that there was really nothing else I could give it to, given my own personal history with this game and just how much I've played it in my life. I know it might be an unpopular pick, maybe, or maybe some of you actually do really love it and you're gonna agree with me, but if I had to pick a game of the year for 2003, I'd have to give it to SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom. I know, you're probably looking at me with your head tilted to the side and calling me the licensed game apologist that I am, but I really just couldn't pick anything other than this. Are there games on here that are better in a so-called objective sense? Probably. Is it silly of me to be saying that a SpongeBob tie-in game is better than something like The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker? Maybe. But beyond the excuse of, this video is called My Favorite Games, this is another case of there simply being no other game on this list that's had the impact on me personally that Battle for Bikini Bottom has had. It's a game I've grown up playing, and to this day, it remains one of my all-time favorite licensed games. Whether it's the original version or the rehydrated version that came out in 2020, which I will talk about in a later video, this is one of those games I feel like I can always go back to, and every time I do, I just smile endlessly. Well, unless I'm dealing with that Rube Goldberg machine in the Merma-lair. God, fucking just get that fucking... Anyway, it's an incredibly charming collectathon 3D platformer that borrows heavily from games like Super Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie, but adds its own spins onto the formula and brings with it a lot of charm from the show. In the world of licensed games, it's always refreshing when a licensed game comes along and actually feels like it was made by someone who cares about the source material, and Battle for Bikini Bottom feels like an incredibly faithful love letter to the show. And I love it for that. It really feels like it was made by a group of people who were huge fans of the show back in its heyday. It might be an unconventional pick for Game of the Year, but hey, 2003 was an unconventional year for the world of gaming. Let me have this one. Again, this game has had an incredible impact on me and has become a huge favorite of mine, and I'm glad to see it's continued to have a huge impact on so many others. I know there's a prolific speedrunning community for the game, and it's really cool to see it continue to have a life this many years later, and even get a big remake so many years later. A lot of licensed games like that don't really get remakes in the same way, so it's pretty cool to see how big this game has continued to be. Now, THQ Nordic, how about we get a few more Nickelodeon games? I mean, you announced that there were going to be a ton of them coming out in 2018. How about some more? And how about some stuff that's not just SpongeBob? So far, since making that announcement about making Nickelodeon games, THQ Nordic has put out 2 Nickelodeon games and they've both been SpongeBob. Maybe we can get some stuff that's not SpongeBob. How about it? But yeah, that's 2003 as a year in gaming, and like I said, it was a bit of a slow one. I don't know if this video is going to end up significantly shorter than the other ones, but yeah, it was a slightly slower year for the world of gaming than 2001 and 2 were. Still some great games, and I definitely had a lot of fun talking about these ones, but I definitely feel like some videos of the coming years are going to be a lot more fun. Like 2004. 2004 has some games that I'm very much looking forward to talking about, but we'll save those for that video. Otherwise, this video is just my opinion. What did you guys think of 2003 as a year in gaming? What are some games you absolutely loved, some that maybe I didn't get to mention? What are your own favorite games from 2003, your greatest memories gaming in 2003? And again, this is usually where I ask some kind of question, and no, I'm not going to ask you guys, did you own an N-Gage? Though you can answer that in the comments if you want. For this video's question that I like to leave at the end, since my favorite game of 2003 was a licensed game, what are your favorite licensed games? Specifically stuff coming from the 6th generation, but if there are some you want to talk about from an earlier or later period, I'll certainly hear you out. Whatever your thoughts and opinions and experiences are, leave them down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe and support some of my other ventures that I have linked in the description, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. And yeah, like I said, 2004 is the next year that I'm going to be talking about. And there are some great games from 2004 that I can't wait to talk about. I feel like that video is going to be a lot of fun. There were quite a few significant games from 2004, both on a personal level and an industry-wide level, and I think that's going to be a very fun video and a very fun year to talk about. So stay tuned for that, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.